It's taking a second longer than I thought to download. Dun, 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 dun. So while I'm doing this, I just want to let you guys know that we do have quite a few, not quite a few, but we do have some makeups, like with students with extenuating circumstances that have to take the exam on Monday. So like Monday afternoon. So the earliest that we will have the exam scores out will probably be Monday night. So I don't want you guys to be like stressing over because like we haven't released the exam scores yet. We just can't release them until everybody's done taking. What is going on? Oh, wait, no. Ah! Okay, wait. I'm still in DFB. Okay, sorry. I had like the DFA window open still, and I was like, yeah, I was worried that like I hadn't joined class and I was just talking to myself. So, come on. Okay, there we go. Should be up in just a second. So exam scores will be released Monday night, ideally. What else? Yeah, that's all I got for you guys. The PowerPoint's big, so it's just taking a second to upload for some reason. Okay, cool. So the nervous system is a pretty hefty chapter, I will say. So we'll probably spend all of today and Monday. Layla. Layla, you have your hand raised. I don't know if you have a question.
My bad, I didn't mean to do that.
No worries. I just want to make sure you're good. Okay. So, roles of the nervous system. Personally, the nervous system is my favorite system. So, I don't know. But like it seems to be the bane of most people's existence. I will say that. So, hopefully you guys like it like I do, but if not, that's okay. I'll forgive you. So, the nervous system has 3 essential roles, okay? Sensing. So, the nervous system is going to be the system that takes in the information from the outside environment, all right? What do you mean why? So the nervous system is going to be the thing that takes in that information from the outside of the body. So things like temperature, things like touch, right? All information that we need to detect from the outside of the body. And it is going to send it to your nervous system for interpretation and response. Okay. So the first function of the nervous system, sensing. Next, it is going to integrate that information. So it is going to process that information. So stuff like sounds, okay? It's going to take sounds and it's going to associate them with past things that you've learned, right? And tell you like familiar sounds or like this is somebody's voice or this is whatever song you're listening to, right? So that nervous system is going to integrate that information related to past experiences and determine response. Okay. So, responding. Nervous system issues are then going to command. The nervous system is then going to do something to respond to whatever the signal is, right? So, for example, you step on a nail. I use this example a lot throughout the lecture, so we'll start with this. Okay, you step on the nail, right? You're going to sense that you've stepped on the nail. Integrating, it is going to put that information together and it is going to say, oh no, we're in a little bit of pain. That pain is coming from our foot. Okay. It's going to integrate that information and it's going to tell you, what do I need to do to get rid of that pain? Lift your foot. Okay. So it's going to determine that response. And then it is going to send that signal down to your muscle and tell you you need to lift your foot up. So it tells your muscles that are in your leg they need to contract in order to lift that foot. Okay? So 3 essential roles. Sensing, using the sense organs and nerve endings to detect changes inside and outside the body. Integrating, putting that information together, telling your body what it needs to do in order to determine that response. And then actually responding. So issuing commands to muscles and glands to initiate the changes based on this information. Now you have 2 main divisions of your nervous system, okay? We are going to talk about the divisions later on. Like, I think it's like page 6 in your packet or something like that. We're going to talk about the 2 main divisions later on, okay? I just want you guys to be familiar with like the abbreviations, basically. So you're going to see like CNS versus PNS come up. Central nervous system is going to consist of your brain and spinal cord, okay? That is it. Anytime you see nerves, okay, so if you see cranial nerves, spinal nerves, anything like that, that is the peripheral nervous system. So everything outside of the brain and spinal cord. I remember a couple semesters ago, we had a question on the exam that was like, which of the following is part of the peripheral nervous system, right? And we had various combinations of brain, spinal cord, nerves, right? We had brain and nerves, we had spinal cord and nerves, we had brain, spinal cord and nerves, and then we had nerves. And I think what happened is people saw nerves and they were like, that can't be the only thing that's part of the peripheral nervous system. It is. Anything that says nerves, peripheral nervous system. If it is the brain or the spinal cord, it is central nervous system. Okay? The reason I'm pointing them out now, CNS versus PNS. Okay, you're going to see the abbreviation CNS, the abbreviation PNS come up quite a bit. The way that your book is written, I think is a little bit confusing for teaching nervous system. So the information that I cover, unless it says just for fun, okay, it is in your book, okay? Unless it's just for fun or it's like something that comes up in funds, it is in your book. It just might not be in the right order or in like the same order as your book, because your book like jumps around a lot, and that's just very confusing to me. Okay, so once your nervous system gets divided into your central and peripheral nervous system, you have further subdivisions, and we're going to talk more about those later on because I use your guys' books diagram to describe them. Okay, but just to give you guys an idea of where we're going. Okay, let's do like 10 more seconds. Yeah, exactly. Your central nervous system includes the brain and the spinal cord. Okay? Brain and spinal cord. Everything else outside of that, well, okay, nerves are part of your peripheral nervous system, okay? Buttocks, not even part of your, well, there are like nerves in your butt, so. Okay. So we have these things called, there's 2 types of cells in your nervous system, okay? You have nerves, which are going to be the communicating ones, okay? So nerves are going to be doing the communication itself. Then you have neuroglia. Okay, neuroglia are going to be the supportive cells of that nervous system. Okay, we're going to talk about a couple different types. So the first ones are going to be oligodendrocytes. Now, these are going to form the myelin sheath in the central nervous system. Now, I know you guys don't know what the myelin sheath is yet. We're going to talk about it. Okay. For now, you just need to write central nervous system. Okay. Next, you're going to have ependymal cells. Okay. Ependymal cells are going to be responsible for lining the spinal cord in the cavities of the brain. Okay. And some secrete cerebrospinal fluid while others have cilia to propel the circulation of CSF. Okay. We're going to talk about cerebrospinal fluid. Cilia we talked about in chapter 3. Okay. If you remember, cilia have those like projections on top, and they do this like crowd surfing motion, right? So they're going to push things around. Okay, so this is one of the places that you're going to see cilia. Okay, so cilia are going to propel the circulation of CSF. Next, we have microglia. Microglia are going to be performing phagocytosis. Okay, so those are going to be responsible for clearing debris, so like vacuuming. Okay, so as your body is going through these metabolic processes, it is going to be digesting it is going to be releasing like byproducts like ammonia that can be like toxic, right? So you need to get rid of it some way. Also, I got like a new monitor, so if I'm like looking up a bunch, well, it's not a new monitor. I like found it in my alleyway. It's like a TV that I hooked up to the computer so I can see everything, but that's why my camera's like down low now. So I'm still like looking at the class. It's just I can't like set the camera up in a good spot right now. So microglia gonna like clear out the debris. All right. What motion do cilia do? Or wait, sorry. Perform phagocytosis. Okay. Astrocytes. Astrocytes are gonna form the blood-brain barrier. Okay. So we don't really talk very much about the blood-brain barrier. I just forgot to take it out of the packet. Okay, so let me show you guys really quickly. Okay, so blood-brain barrier protects the brain from, so like we're not covering this section. Okay, so you can just cross this all out of your packet if you're following along in the packet. Okay, so don't worry about this. The only thing I want you to know about the blood-brain barrier, astrocytes make it. Blood-brain barrier does exactly what it sounds like. It separates the blood and brain. That's all. Okay. Now, Schwann cells, like oligodendrocytes, are going to be found, or the cells that form the myelin sheath in the central nervous system. Schwann cells are going to be responsible for forming the myelin sheath in the peripheral nervous system. Okay. These are the only glial cells found in the PNS. Okay. So remember, CNS means central nervous system, PNS means peripheral nervous system. So those are like the supportive cells of the nervous system, meaning the ones that are doing all like the background work. Okay. The other type of cell, neurons. Okay. Neurons are going to be responsible for handling communication. So the whole point of the nervous system, bring information to the the central nervous system, bring information away from the central nervous system, right? Okay. So we have 3 classes of sensory neurons. You have sensory, aka afferent neurons. These are going to be responsible for detecting stimuli and transmitting this information to the CNS. Okay. The way that I remember this, afferent, arrive. So makes sense, right? You're detecting information from the outside, bringing it to the inside. Sensory, afferent neurons. You should know both names. Next, you're going to have interneurons. Interneurons are responsible for connecting pathways between neurons. Okay, so between, just like you have intercostal muscles, right? Intercostal muscles between the ribs. Interneurons between neurons. Okay, so for example, in your eyes, you have what are called photoreceptors that are going to be responding to light. All right. In between these photoreceptors, and we're going to talk about photoreceptors in chapter 12, so it's the next chapter we covered. Okay. Between these photoreceptors, you have interneurons that are connecting the pathways so that they are coordinating with one another. They are talking to one another. Okay. Interneurons are only going to be found in the central nervous system. Next, you have motor neurons. Okay. Motor neurons bring information away from the central nervous system. They are called efferent neurons. So the way to remember this, efferent means exit. Okay. So they are going to take the commands from your central nervous system and take them to your muscle cells, to your gland cells. Okay. So they are going to relay messages from the brain to the muscle or the gland cells. All right. So handle communication, 3 classes: sensory, aka afferent, interneurons, and motor, aka efferent neurons. Okay. This is the same thing. It's just in a different format. So if you guys are like chart people versus like typed out, whatever works for you. Okay. It's just an alternate presentation of the same information. Okay, like 10 more seconds.
Miss Woodruff.
Mhm.
Is this recorded? Like, can we come back and look at this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the class of neuron that detects stimuli, afferent, right? Afferent arrive. A goes with A. Great job, guys. So they're going to contain sensory information, okay? Efferent is going to be responsible for exiting the spinal cord, right? So taking information to the muscles and the gland cells, okay? Interneurons connect the pathways. Schwann cells are going to form the myelin sheath. Okay, so next we're going to talk about neuron structure, okay? Neurons have like 3 basic parts, okay? You have a cell body, an axon, and a dendrite, okay? Your cell body, which is also called your soma, okay, so you need to know both names, is the control center. So the way that I always describe the cell body is like Rome, because I say like all, like you've heard the phrase like all roads lead to Rome. All dendrites are going to lead to this cell body, aka the soma. Okay. And what the dendrites are these little projections that are going to carry information to the soma from other neurons. Okay. Getting my little annotation thingy up. Okay. So the dendrites go towards, we can do a thinner pen for this. Okay, so they're going to bring information towards the soma. All of them are going to bring information towards the soma. All right. Where are they getting that information? They are getting it from other neurons. Okay, and we're going to explain how that works like very generally in a second here. Okay, so all of that information gets gathered at the soma. The soma is going to be like the control center. Okay, so it is the capital of the neuron. It is then going to send that information down what is called the axon. Each neuron is only going to have one axon of the cell. Okay. So dendrites receive the information, send it to the cell body, send it down the axon. Okay. So those are the first three like basic parts. Now, axons are going to be encased in what is called the myelin sheath. Okay. So I like to think of like the myelin sheath as like bubble wrap. I don't know why, that's just what I've always thought of it as. Okay. So your myelin sheath is going to be like this insulation that wraps around your axon. Okay. It is going to consist mainly of lipids. And when we get to like gray versus white matter, we're going to bring this up again. But now we've already mentioned neuroglia, right? We mentioned two different types of cells. We mentioned Schwann cells versus oliggodendrocytes, right? So Schwann cells are going to be responsible for forming this in the PNS, so that peripheral nervous system, meaning it's made up of nerves. Okay. Oligodendrocytes are going to be responsible for forming it in the central nervous system. Does anybody remember what the central nervous system is comprised of? There's just two parts.
Brain and spinal cord.
Exactly. The brain and the spinal cord. Okay. So oligodendrocytes in the brain and spinal cord. Everything else, Schwann cells. Now, the way that your myelin sheath is constructed, okay, it's like segments of bubble wrap. Okay. So you have like individual segments. And you have little spaces in between these segments that are called nodes of Ranvier. Okay, the reason they're named like that, the guy that discovered them is Ranvier, some French dude. I don't know. He figured them out, so he got to name them after himself. Okay, so there's little gaps in the myelin sheath called nodes of Ranvier, and we'll talk about why those are important in a second here. Okay, and it's going to carry that information down to the synaptic knob. And then the synaptic knob is going to be the thing that communicates with the other neurons. A lot of the time they communicate through this thing called a neurotransmitter, which is exactly what it sounds like. Okay, so like think of like a radio transmitter, right? It transmits information, it sends information. Neurotransmitter sends information to another neuron. Okay. Now, the whole point of the myelin sheath, okay, is going to be speeding up impulse conduction. So speeding up that signal, okay? Now, the way that I like to explain it, okay, is when you're driving on a highway versus when you're like driving on a side road, okay? So when you're driving on a highway, right, everybody's going really fast because you have like a mile in between those exits, right? So you're not having to stop to let people on and off. You're not having to slow down, really, right? People are zooming along they can get off every 2 miles or something like that, right? You notice that it kind of slows down at like where people are getting onto the highway and whatnot, but like you don't have to do that as often unless you're in Chicago where like every quarter mile you guys have an exit. Okay. In the boonies, that's not a thing. It's like you drive and you'll see an exit in 3 miles, right? So Mylan Sheath has those like with the whole versus a side road. Okay. You think of like a side road, right? You have a lot of stop signs. You have to let people like turn off all the time. You have to let people in all the time, right? You have to stop a lot more frequently, right? Because you have more like stopping points. Okay. The Mylan Sheath acts as like the highway. Okay. It helps speed things up because you have less places for this like transaction to occur. Okay. So if that analogy does not help you out at all, perfectly okay. You guys do not have to worry about knowing the specifics of why the Mylan Sheath speeds up impulse conduction. Okay. I just think it helps connect the dots. But the whole purpose of the Mylan Sheath is to speed up impulse conduction. Okay. It's important for another reason why in a second, which we'll talk about in a second, but okay. Oh, great job. We got everybody one person. I didn't give it 10. Oh, we got everyone. Sick. Oh, that makes me so happy. Where's my little thing? I love it when everybody's answering because I don't like to do points deductions. So it always makes my life easier. So the whole purpose of the Mylan Sheath, speed up impulse conduction, right? You want it to go faster. The whole point of the nervous system is you want to communicate as quickly as possible, right? If your hand is on a stove, you want that information to get to your brain as quickly as possible so that your brain can tell your rest of your body, pick your hand up, right? So the whole point of the nervous system is to quickly communicate, and the Mylan Sheath helps that happen. Now, in your peripheral nervous system, and I have like this summary slide typed out for you guys. So like if you miss anything on these next few slides, don't stress about it. Oh, I forgot to send you guys the PowerPoint. Right. My last class reminded me. Let me do that for you right now. Sorry. Having a bit of a spacey morning. Also, I don't know if a lot of people in this class, but I don't think actually many people in this class have emailed me over the past couple of days. I know that I like didn't respond to emails like yesterday. So if you have emailed me and I haven't gotten back to you, I will be like spending some time responding to emails tomorrow because today I'm teaching all day. So don't stress. I've been trying to like focus on people that need makeup exams, but I'll see. Yeah.
Is this supposed to be a page in our packet?
Hold on one second. I'm sending out the thing. So it's not a page, it's like a table. And I have like the summary. I typed out like a little summary for you guys. It's just like after these two slides. So you'll see. So in the peripheral nervous system, we've already talked about the cells that make it up, the Schwann cells. Okay. So Schwann cells are going to wrap themselves around that axon. Okay. And the difference between these Schwann cells and the oligodendrocytes that you see in the central nervous system. Okay. The Schwann cells each cover like one segment. Okay. So each segment of that myelin sheath. So if we go back to this diagram here. Okay. Every one of these like little segments here, that is a different cell in your peripheral nervous system. Okay. Now, as we learned, right, all living cells are going to have a nucleus. Okay. So the reason why we talk about why Schwann cells are important versus oligodendrocytes, Schwann cells have their nucleus wrapped around that myelin sheath or that myelin segment. Okay. In a layer called your neurolemma. Now, why the neurolemma is important, it allows your nerve to regenerate to a certain extent. Okay. So just to recap, okay, and like I said, I have it typed out in a summary slide, but your peripheral nervous system has Schwann cells, okay? Multiple Schwann cells are going to make up that myelin sheath, right? Each segment is its own Schwann cell, okay? For that last box, does it have a neurolemma? Can it regenerate? Yes, it can, okay? Now, in your central nervous system, on the other hand, we have these things called oligodendrocytes. The oligodendrocytes are going to have these extensions coming off of the cell. So each oligodendrocyte is going to wrap around multiple axons. Now, this is going to help your axons in your central nervous system communicate better. There's a couple other things it does as well, but it helps the axons in your central nervous system communicate better. Okay, so the nucleus of that oligodendrocyte is going to be outside of the segments of myelin. Okay. The reason why this is important, that means it does not have a neurolemma, which means the nerve cannot regenerate. So if you have damage to your brain cells, they don't regenerate. Okay, they don't grow back. If you have damage to your nerves in your arm, to a certain extent, they can repair themselves, depending on like the extent of the injury. Okay, so that's all this slide says. Nerves in your peripheral nervous system can repair if some and the neurolemma are intact. So some of the nerve and the neurolemma are intact. Okay. Nerves of the central nervous system are going to lack that neurolemma and therefore they cannot regenerate. So my little summary slide. Okay. The whole point of the myelin sheath helps speed up signals or helps the signal travel faster. Okay. Some nerves do not have myelin. They are called unmyelinated axons. Okay. In your peripheral nervous system, Schwann cells. Okay. There are going to be multiple cells per axon, right? Because each one of those segments is a cell. Okay. And yes, it does have a neurolemma and it can regenerate. Now, in your central nervous system, you have oligodendrocytes. Okay. You have multiple axons per cell. Okay. So one cell has multiple extensions coming off of it. And no, it does not have a neurolemma, therefore it cannot regenerate. Okay. So your table should look something like this. Okay. So based on that little summary, leave this up for a second. Okay. So hopefully we got all of that. Okay. We're moving way faster than in my first class. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the divisions of the nervous system. This one is straight from your book. So if you preferred that like first one that I showed you that doesn't have the descriptions, that's fine too. This is just, I wanted to make sure that you guys had access to it like easily in your book. So this is the one that I used for your packets. Okay. Now we've already said there's only two things in your central nervous system, right? You have your brain and you have your spinal cord. Okay. Your peripheral nervous system is going to be everything outside of that. So your peripheral nervous system gets divided into two things. You are going to have your sensory division and your motor division. Okay. So sensory, again, we're talking about sensory neurons, right? They are carrying that information away from the CNS. So afferent neurons. Your motor division, on the other hand, okay? Or wait, sorry, I messed that up. Sensory division is going to arrive at the CNS. I apologize. So sensory division arrive at the CNS. Okay. Motor division is going to exit the CNS. So it is going to leave the CNS and bring that information to glands and to muscle cells. Okay. Your sensory division is going to get further divided into two different things. You have your somatic sensory. Okay. So we very, very, very briefly mentioned what somatic, like the somatic nervous system, when we talked about muscles. If you remember, like when we talked about the differences between the skeletal muscle, or like one of the like distinguishing features of skeletal muscle, right? They're innervated by the somatic system. Okay. So somatic sensory is going to carry signals from skin, bones, joints, and muscles. Then you have your visceral sensory. Wow. Okay. When you say viscera, you are talking about organs. Okay. Okay. So viscera, you are talking about your organs. Next, you're going to have your somatic, or so now we're going to talk about the motor system. So the stuff that is carrying information to your glands and to your muscles. Okay. So your sensory division, your afferent division is bringing information to the nervous system, right? So you're bringing information from your skin, your bones, your joints in your somatic sensory to the central nervous system. Visceral is going to be talking about from your organs to your central nervous system. Okay, viscera is like a specific part of the organ, but if you see visceral, like you'll see like visceral reflexes, it's talking about reflexes having to do with your organs. Okay, so next talking about the motor division. The motor division is going to take information away from the CNS. Okay, so your somatic motor going to innervate skeletal muscles. Okay, so if you guys remember, I had you write it down on that table about skeletal muscles, and I was like, don't worry too much about this, but it will come back to haunt you. Ta-da! Happy Halloween. Haunting you. No, so funny. All right. Next, you have your autonomic motor system. Okay. Your autonomic motor system is going to do automatic activities. So it's going to control blood pressure and heart rate. Okay. Your autonomic nervous system is going to be divided into two different systems. And you have your sympathetic division and your parasympathetic division. So if you've ever heard of fight or flight, right? Your fight or flight response, that is a specific division of your nervous system. Okay. Parasympathetic division is going to be the opposite of the sympathetic division. You have your rest and digest functions. Okay. So sympathetic, fight or flight, parasympathetic, rest and digest. And we're going to talk about those like, they're like the last things we talk about. Okay. So hear about them today, you know what I mean? So that the words aren't like completely foreign to you when we get to them. But like we're gonna cover so much information today. So if you don't remember on Monday, I completely understand. Okay. Now, I like to use this diagram as we are going through the lecture, okay, as like a little roadmap of sorts. So, like I said, I teach the like nervous system, not like differently than your book. I just like, I don't know. I think your book jumps around a lot and like I try to make it more straightforward for you guys. So, and maybe straightforward for myself. So we're going to start by talking about the brain and the spinal cord, so the central nervous system. Okay. Now, we have gray matter and white matter. All right. So gray matter is going to be consisting of cell bodies and interneurons. So they're named based on their appearance. Gray matter literally looks gray. White matter literally looks white. Okay. So gray matter is going to consist of those cell bodies and those interneurons. Does anybody remember what the other word for cell body is? Soma. Exactly. Your soma. Okay. So it consists of cell bodies and interneurons, aka your soma is your cell body, right? White matter, on the other hand, white matter is going to consist of those axons. It's going to consist of those heavily myelinated axons. Okay. Now, white matter is white because of the abundance of myelin. Myelin is very fatty. Okay. So lipids, aka fats. So when you go to stain something, all right, lipids are really, really hard to get a stain past. Actually, like bacteria, you have to use a very specific type of stain when you go to stain bacteria that have this like lipid outer layer to help dissolve that outer layer. So hold on, there's a student that's like locked out of class. So let me see. Okay. So, white matter is white because of the abundance of lipids, right? So if you think about like roast beef or steak, right? Like it has those like fatty chunks in it that appear white. Same thing here, okay? The high fat content makes it look white. It's the high lipid content. Okay. Now, the reason why I do this little chart in the brain, okay, the white matter is found in a different spot than where it's found in the spinal cord. In the brain, the gray matter is going to be found on the outside, okay, and the white matter is going to be found on the inside. So gray matter forms the outer cortex, white matter on the inside of the brain. In the spinal cord, however, this is a little bit different. Okay. In the spinal cord, it is going to form the inside of the spinal cord, and it's going to form the white matter is going to form the outside of the spinal cord. Okay. So the brain and the spinal cord are opposite on where you find the gray matter versus the white matter. So I always just point this out because like it took me a while to like, I don't know, conceptualize this. Now there's a couple definitions that I like to go through as well because your book kind of just starts talking about these things and doesn't like, I don't know, distinctly define them. So you like think about how you crumple up a newspaper, right? There's two reasons why your brain has this like crumpled appearance. The first one, you want to fit it into a small space. Okay. So think about how you crumple up a newspaper, right? When you crumple up that newspaper, you get like a bunch of folds and like ridges in it and whatnot. Okay. Same thing with your brain. You're trying to fit your brain into a really small space because of like the birthing paradox, right? In order to walk upright, we need to have smaller pelvises, which means we need to have babies with smaller heads. Means we need to fit all that stuff in there. Okay. The other reason why is because of location. Okay. So you want different areas of your brain to be able to communicate with one another. So a lot of the time, it's like these two areas are kind of communicating with one another. So it's a lot easier to like bring these areas together than it is to like stretch them out, right? Like now there's still not like necessarily connections between the two, but like it's just to point out that having these ridges helps bring these areas together. Because like if you were looking under the brain, right, there's tracts. So there's connections running in here. Okay. I guess I should use this as the example going forward because that's probably easier. Okay. So going back to definitions, right? The like ups and downs of these different like folds have different names. So the gyri are going to be the ridges. So the gyri are the things that stick up. Okay. Sulci are going to be these shallow grooves. So the things that go down. The way that I remember it, sulci sink. All right. You have a fissure that we're going to talk about called, it's going to be your longitudinal fissure. Okay. A fissure is just a really, really deep sulci. It's going to split your brain into two halves. Now, these halves are going to be called hemispheres. All right. Now, your hemispheres, the same thing as if you look at a globe. Okay. Hemi meaning half, sphere, ball, sphere, whatever it might be. Right. Just like your globe has eastern and western hemispheres. Okay. Your brain has left and right hemispheres. All right. So hemisphere, half of the brain. Okay. Cerebral cortex. When we say cerebral cortex, we are talking about the surface of the cerebrum. And we're going to talk about where the cerebrum is in just a minute. But the cerebrum is going to be like the main part of your brain. So it's usually like, it's the area that you think of as being the brain when we say the brain. Okay. The cerebral cortex is the surface of the brain. Does anybody remember what kind of matter makes up the surface of the brain? Gray or white?
Gray.
Gray, exactly. It's even written on here. Gray matter, white matter. Okay, gray is on the surface, white matter is underneath. White matter is white because of the abundance of myelin, aka fat. Now, I always point out these major landmarks in the brain because as we go through these diagrams, you're going to see a picture of the corpus callosum, which helps you kind of like orient yourself to where you are in the brain. Okay, so longitudinal fissure. We already said the fissure is like a really deep sulcus, right? What the purpose of the longitudinal fissure is, it's going to divide your cerebrum into left and right cerebral hemispheres. Okay, so this is the picture from your book. I just don't think it shows the structures really well. So I have a bunch of other pictures to help give you guys a better idea of what we're looking at. All right. So this longitudinal fissure is literally going to split the two halves of the brain. Okay. At the very bottom of this like splitting, you have your corpus callosum. Okay. Now the point of the corpus callosum, you can see it here highlighted in green if you're looking from like longitudinal view. Okay. Sagittal view. Sorry, you guys don't use longitudinal. Sagittal view. Okay, so if you're looking at this from a sagittal view, okay, that's what it looks like. The whole point of the corpus callosum is to connect the two hemispheres. Now, I really like this dissection picture. What they did here is literally just like cut off the top of the brain here. So you can really like, you can see really well how like all of this stuff is gathering here, right? Because the two halves of your brain, right? They're separate, but like you still need to have communication between the two. Like you'll hear people be like, oh, I'm like a right-brained person or I'm a left-brained person, right? It's like pseudoscience, but the point is like your two halves of your brain still need to communicate with one another. And the way that this happens is through your corpus callosum. So the way that I like to teach the brain, I go superficial to deep. Okay. So superficial to deep structures. Okay. Now on here, I forgot one space. We'll talk about it in a second. Like I said, there's some changes from last semester, so bear with me. I'm doing my best. So the meninges are going to be this like protective outer layer. All right, they're like the plastic wrap of the brain. Oh, how are we doing on time? Well, we'll go for another 10 minutes and then we'll take a break. Okay. The meninges are going to be this like protective outer layer of the brain. All right. So they sit right underneath the bone of the skull. The first layer is called your dura mater. Okay. Dura literally means tough, like durable, right? So dura mater literally translates to tough mother. So that is going to be your tough outer layer of the meninges. Arachnoid mater, this is going to be your web-like middle layer. Okay, so think of like arachnophobia. Okay, arachnophobia is fear of spiders. Arachnoid mater, web-like structure. Okay. Underneath that, in your arachnoid mater, you have a lot of blood vessels. Okay. So you can see them like here. So when we say highly vascularized, what we're saying is that it has a lot of blood vessels, a lot of vasculature. Okay. Pia mater, the way that I like to explain the pia mater, when you were a kid in school, or at least I don't know, when I was a kid in school, like you take like that white Elmer's glue and you like paint it on your hands and let it dry, right? And then like you peel it off. Okay. Like once it dries, right? So the pia mater is like that kind of texture where it's like really, really thin. Like, yeah, you can like pull it off, but like it's really a huge pain. Okay. It doesn't pull off in like one sheet. It's really like super, super thin. Okay. Whereas like the dura mater is like when you do those like blackhead strips, you like pull it off and like it's still in the same shape. So that's the difference between like your dura mater and your pia mater. I don't really have a good one for the arachnoid mater. Okay. Now I wrote 2 spaces. You actually have 3. Okay. The first one is going to be your epidural space. Okay. So your epidural space above the dura. Okay. So if you remember, epi means outer, dural, dura. So outside of the dura. Okay. Sub means under, right? So subdural space underneath the dura. Same thing with subarachnoid space underneath the arachnoid mater. Okay. So the arachnoid, so a lot of the time what you're going to hear, like, okay, so if you get an epidural injection when you're getting, when you're in labor, what they're doing is they're injecting into that epidural space. Okay. Subdural, I don't know, I feel like I hear it a lot on Grey's Anatomy where they're like subdural hematoma. Okay. The subdural hematoma is just a collection of blood in that subdural space. Okay? Same thing with subarachnoid hematoma or subarachnoid hemorrhage. Okay. Just blood in that space. Okay. So For the meninges, we start with the skull. Okay, so that outermost layer is going to be your skull. Underneath that, you have your dura mater, which literally means tough mother. Okay. Underneath that, arachnoid miter, spider mother. Because like mothers are protective, I guess. I don't know. That's why they like named them like this. But pia mater. I'm not sure exactly what it translates into, but I see it's like thin mother or something, but it's that thin layer. Okay. And then underneath all of that, you have the brain, right? Because the whole purpose is to protect that brain. Now, for your spaces, you have your epidural space, which is going to be outside of your dura mater, right? Underneath that, subdural. So that's subdural space. Okay. And then underneath that, you have your subarachnoid space. So underneath the arachnoid. Okay. So let's go ahead and do our 10-minute break. So I'll put the timer up. Here's my thing. Okay. And I will see you guys in 10 minutes. Okay, so let's get back into it. Just get. There we go. Cool. So this is the same diagram, basically. It's the same information. This is just a diagram that comes in your book. We've talked about this stuff, this stuff, this stuff, this stuff, this stuff. Or wait, no, we didn't talk about this one. I don't think we're going to. Delete. Okay. We'll get to dural sinuses later on, maybe, but yeah. Okay. So there's a couple of different important regions in the brain. So these are like the general subdivisions of them. So starting with your cerebrum. Okay, your cerebrum is going to be that largest portion. So like I said, the cerebrum is like what we think of when we think of the brain. Okay. This is the definitions from your book. We've already talked about gyrate. We've already talked about sulci. Okay. So underneath your cerebrum, you have your diencephalon. Your diencephalon has a couple different structures inside of that, which we again will talk about later on. Okay. So your diencephalon has a couple different parts to it, which we'll talk about, called your thalamus and your hypothalamus. It's responsible for more than just like connecting two things, but we'll talk about those things when we get to them. Your cerebellum is going to be the second largest region. It contains more neurons than the rest of the brain combined. We don't really talk about it too much beyond that. I talk about a couple different things in it because I think that the cerebellum is really important, like interesting. Then you have your brain stem. Now the brain stem is going to make up the rest of the brain, and it has three really important structures inside of it. So again, this is what everything looks like, and everything's written out on this diagram, but the text is a little small, so I type it out on the one before this. So you have your cerebellum, which is going to be this like big portion here, right? This is like what we think of when we think of the brain. Okay. Underneath it, you have your diencephalon. The diencephalon is going to sit between the cerebrum and the midbrain. Underneath that, you have your brain stem. Okay, your brain stem is going to have those three different structures to it: your midbrain, your pons, and your medulla. The cerebellum is like this little bonus piece here. Okay, it sits under the brain. Cerebellum literally translates to the little brain. Okay, we've already talked about sulci, but this is where your book brings up gyri and sulci, so that's why I have sulci sync written in the corner here. Okay, so first we're going to talk about your cerebrum, so this main portion here. Now your cerebrum has a couple of different sections to it called lobes. So a lot of these sections are associated with regions that you guys have already learned. Okay, so if you remember all the way back to chapter 1, things have come back to haunt you again. So the first section is going to be, okay, so with lobes, what I always warn people, there are a lot of functions of each of the lobes, right? And a lot of them overlap, okay? So when you are going through and learning the lobes, start with what's different between them. Same thing like when we talked about the different systems, right? I told you a lot of them control acid-base balance. So acid-base balance is not going to be what the question is on. And when we ask you questions, we are aiming at a specific region, which means we are going to give you things that make that region stand out. Okay. So something like your frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is going to be found in this forehead region here. So that frontal region. Okay. The frontal lobe is going to be responsible for governing voluntary movements. So when you plan out things, when you plan to move your arm, when you plan to like write something, okay, voluntary movements. Memory and emotion, we're going to talk about those. Emotion comes up in a couple of these ones, so I wouldn't use that one. Okay. Decision making. All right. Reasoning and aggression, but aggression, again, that's kind of associated with emotion, right? So that's going to come up in different things. It's also the site for certain aspects of your personality. Okay. I would really focus on voluntary movement more so than anything else, but decision making, reasoning, also big ones. Okay. Now, the way that you can remember, there's a lot of functions of the frontal lobe, right? The way that you can remember them, your frontal lobe is very heavily impacted by alcohol. So think of things that get impacted when you've drank a lot, right? Motor control, memory, emotion, social judgment. You don't always make the best decisions, right? So think of the things that like get heavily impacted when you drink. Okay. Next, right behind your frontal lobe, okay, you have something called your central sulcus, which is going to run side to side. So it's going to run in that coronal plane. Okay. It's going to run between your frontal lobe and what's called your parietal lobe. Now, your parietal lobe is going to be responsible for sensations, really more so than any other lobe. Okay. So if we're talking about sensation, you're talking about your parietal lobe. Okay. As well as proprioception, and we're going to talk about proprioception in chapter 12. All right. Behind your parietal lobes, at the very back of your head, you have your occipital lobe. Occipital lobe is concerned with visual information. There's not like a good marker between where like the parietal lobe and the occipital lobe are. Okay. Not something super easy to find. It's just in the back of your brain. Okay. Occipital lobe. Anytime you hear occipital lobe, think vision. Now, running next to your occipital lobe, you have your temporal lobe. Now, your temporal lobe is going to be separated from your frontal and your parietal lobes by what's called your lateral sulcus. So your lateral sulcus is going to run side to side like this. Okay. Temporal lobe is going to be involved in a couple different things, mainly hearing and smell. Okay, which helps you remember because your ears are right here, your temporal lobe's like right here. That's the one I focus on. See, again, you're seeing learning, memory, emotional behavior. Okay. Yes, visual recognition, but like that's a whole complicated pathway you guys don't need to know. Okay. So your temporal lobe involved in hearing and smell, really more so than anything else. Okay. Now that lateral sulcus that runs between your frontal lobe and your temporal lobe. Okay. If you pull apart the two pieces of your lateral sulcus, like literally you put forceps in and you pull them open. Okay, there's another layer of cortex tucked in there called your insula. Okay. Now the insula is involved in a lot of different things. The thing that's like distinct about the insula is the addiction. Okay. So for insula, can you break the monitor? It's dying. Just turn it off. Thank you. So the insula is very heavily involved in addiction. Okay. So you guys don't need to worry about precentral and postcentral gyri. Okay. So for the different lobes, you should have frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, and insula. Okay. So your packet should, where's the, should look like that. Okay. So I'll give you a second. I'm just gonna take a bite of my pizza, unless you guys want to see me chewing. Mm. Okay. So this is the same information, it's just in a different diagram. So if you prefer this one, well, like this is just from Dr. A. So whatever works. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the different sensory areas. So starting with your olfactory association area. Okay. Ow. Kritoshka, stop it. So your olfactory association area is going to be associated with olfaction, okay, which is just the sense of smell. Right. So olfactory association area is going to be found right at the front of your brain. Okay. Right over what's called your olfactory nerve, which is going to be responsible for smell. Primary gustatory complex. Gustation is the sense of taste. Okay. So your primary gustatory complex is going to be responsible for the sense of taste. Okay. Visual association area. A visual association area is going to be responsible for information acquired through the primary visual cortex. Now, the difference between the primary cortex and the association area, okay? The primary cortex is going to take the information in. So that is taking in the raw information. The association area is going to be responsible for making sense of it, okay? So think about it as like, you're looking at the slide right now, right? Your brain is seeing all of these like black shapes and these colors on here, right? So primary gustatory, the primary auditory cortex is going to take, or sorry, we're starting with visual. So the primary visual cortex is going to be responsible for seeing the different shapes, okay? Then your brain takes that information and it goes, I know what this shape is. It's the letter A or it's the letter V, right? So it's going to take that information and it's going to associate it with previous knowledge. Okay, so it's going to allow you to recognize familiar objects. Okay. So primary visual cortex is going to be responsible for sight. The visual association area is going to be responsible for recognizing familiar objects. Next, talking about the auditory areas. Same thing. Primary auditory cortex, it's going to take in that raw information about hearing. So it's going to take in that raw information about sounds. Your association area is going to be responsible for recognizing familiar sounds, okay? So making sense of that. Okay. So when we say primary, it's taking in that information. When we say association area, it's making sense of it. Okay. Now for functional areas of the cerebral cortex, for that diagram, there's a lot more on here than you guys need to know, because I pulled this like right from your F.A. Davis workbook. Okay. So it has certain areas on here like Broca's area, Wernicke's area, precentral gyrus, postcentral gyrus. You guys do not need to label those, okay? So the only reason I point that out is because people a lot of the time are like looking for like the specific name for each of the things, right? Which makes sense. But for these specifically, there's not like, you guys don't need to know everyone, okay? Stop. All right, 10 more seconds. Yeah, great job, right? So your occipital lobe is basically wholly devoted to vision, okay? So next we're gonna move under the cerebral cortex a little, okay? And if you remember, I showed you at the very beginning when we started talking about the brain, right? I showed you the corpus callosum, okay? The corpus callosum, to give you an idea of where it is, sorry, she's like, yeah. She's decided she likes people food a lot and she's AIDS. So, the corpus callosum, okay? Remember, that's going to be found at the base of the longitudinal fissure, okay? Now we are going to be looking at what's called the limbic system, okay, which is going to be found right underneath that corpus callosum. Your limbic system has two important structures, okay? You have your hippocampus and you're going to have your amygdala. Why is it doing this? Okay. I don't know why the highlighter is doing this right now, so hold on one second. Okay, so the hippocampus is going to be charged with converting short-term memory into long-term memory. Sorry, let me start with what the limbic system is responsible for. The limbic system is going to be responsible for memory and emotion. Okay. The first structure we talk about is the hippocampus, which is responsible particularly for that memory aspect of the memory and emotion. Okay. At the very front of your hippocampus, so your hippocampus, they say looks like a seahorse. I don't really see it, but yeah. So like this tail thing, okay, as well as the like inside of it looks like a seahorse tail. But anyways, inside of your hippocampus, at the very top of your hippocampus, you have your amygdala. Okay, the amygdala are these little almond-shaped masses at the very front here. Okay, these are going to be the things that are responsible for emotion. So if you notice, right, memories that you have a strong emotion associated with tend to be like encoded more deeply, right? Like, I don't know. If you remember a time when you got really mad, chances are you probably remember it pretty well. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about the location of these two, I just always point this out for like fun, okay? You can see the structure up here. That is your olfactory bulb. Okay, so that is where smells are coming in. All right. Based on location alone, you can probably tell that the olfactory bulb is very closely associated with that amygdala and that hippocampus. Okay, so it's one of the reasons why smells are going to elicit like really strong memories and emotions. So, like, if you smell like your grandma's perfume, right, that's going to really strongly remind you of them. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the basal ganglia. Okay. The basal ganglia are these little masses of gray matter that are important for movement. Okay. Now, I always point out the basal ganglia is different than the limbic system. Okay. The basal ganglia is like the limbic system like wraps around the basal ganglia. Okay. So the basal ganglia is associated with movement. The limbic system is associated with memory. Okay. So the basal ganglia, one of the diseases that impacts the basal ganglia is Parkinson's disease. So like a lot of the time with neuroscience, the way that I like to explain areas is like knowing what happens when that area is not working, right? So the basal ganglia is responsible for doing that motor coordination. Okay. If it is not working, your movements are not going to be like smooth, right? So we're going to talk about Parkinson's in a second. Okay, with the limbic system, Alzheimer's tends to impact the limbic system pretty early on. So the limbic system is more responsible for like memory and emotion, right? Things that like get impacted early on with Alzheimer's. Now, Parkinson's disease is going to be associated with a couple different symptoms. So you have tremors, muscle rigidity, slowed movement, and balance problems. So in that little thing that says what symptoms can you see with Parkinson's, the list is right here. Tremors, muscle rigidity, slowed movement, and balance problems. Your roles as LPNs directly relate to like the symptomology. Okay, so monitoring for medication effectiveness, assisting with mobility and fall prevention, supporting activities of daily living, promoting safe swallowing and nutrition, stuff like that. Okay, so anything that impacts musculature is going to impact like swallowing and breathing eventually, right? So you always want to keep an eye on that kind of stuff. But really with Parkinson's, it's like you want to keep an eye on how they're moving around. Okay. So next we're going to talk about diencephalon. There are two pieces to the diencephalon, okay? The first thing, your thalamus, okay? Your thalamus is going to be two eggs like sitting side by side. They're going to be shaped like two eggs side by side. The way that I like to explain the thalamus is like the switchboard operator of the brain, okay? It's going to direct information where it needs to go. The other thing that it does, like the switchboard, like if you remember, like, well, I don't know if you remember, if you've ever seen like 1920s movies or whatever, where they're like, where can I direct your call? And they do like the chords things, right? That's what I think of as like the thalamus, okay? Now, the thalamus is also going to have a role in filtering out things, okay? So it's going to be filtering out information. So like if you have like if you think about hearing, right? You're taking in a lot of information around you from like sound, okay? if you were listening to everything going on, okay, your brain would just get overwhelmed and wouldn't be able to process that information. Okay. Your thalamus, to a certain extent, is going to filter out that information so that you can focus on what's important. Okay. Your hypothalamus, on the other hand, it's going to, hypo meaning below, thalamus, right? Now, the hypothalamus is going to be really responsible for influencing like autonomic functions. Okay. So it controls the autonomic nervous system. It has centers responsible for hunger, thirst, and temperature regulation. Okay. It has what's called the pituitary, or controls the pituitary gland, which is often called like the master gland, because of its influence on endocrine glands. Okay. It's involved in emotional responses, including fear, anger, pleasure, and aggression. So like I said, there's a lot of areas that are involved with emotion. The hypothalamus just happens to be one of them. So leave that up for a second. Okay. So these two diagrams are just the same thing, just written in a different way. If you guys, I don't know, prefer them this way, it's up to you. Next, we're going to talk about ventricles, okay? The important thing about ventricles, they're just like fluid-filled cushions inside the brain. Highlighting. There it is. Okay. Fluid-filled cushions inside the brain. No, fluid-filled. Okay. Now you have different ventricles. You guys do not need to know all of them. Okay. It's not in the packet. I don't expect you guys to know it. All right. Now what fills these ventricles up is something called CSF. Okay. So CSF is also called cerebrospinal fluid. Okay. So cerebrospinal fluid gets abbreviated to CSF. All right, so that's what fills up the ventricles. CSF is going to be produced by something called your choroid plexus. Okay, the choroid plexus is going to be located in the lateral ventricles, which is just one of the subdivisions of the ventricles. Okay. So the CSF has a couple of different purposes. Okay. It's going to be responsible for providing nourishment. So it's going to bring all of those like glucose and proteins and whatnot that need to go to the brain so it can do its metabolic functions. It's going to be responsible for removing metabolic waste. So we had a speaker come to Penn State who was doing research on the function of sleep, because like sleep doesn't make sense, right? Like you're completely vulnerable. So there's got to be like a very good reason for you to sleep, right? So this guy was doing research on like why we sleep, and one of the things that he found is that like the brain volume decreases when you sleep, which increases the amount of space that the CSF is able to flow, which increases the amount of waste that you're able to get rid of. So CSF like helps remove those metabolic wastes. So if you notice, like when you're overly tired, right, those metabolic wastes start to accumulate and impact your neurological function. So CSF is going to help get rid of those metabolic wastes. It is also going to help cushion your brain against minor trauma. Okay. So if you're like shaking your head too much, it doesn't like immediately hit your skull. Okay. The last thing that happens that's important in CSF, your brain is going to monitor the level of carbon dioxide and help trigger responses to help maintain homeostasis. Okay. So as your body is going through and doing these metabolic processes, all right, it's going to be producing carbon dioxide as a byproduct. All right. Your brain is going to keep an eye on that level of carbon dioxide, and it is going to like respond, right? So if we have a high level of carbon dioxide, we have a low level of oxygen. So it can do things like increase your breathing rate, decrease your metabolic rate, stuff like that, okay? So the CSF is really important for a couple different reasons. Um, Now, I always talk about this French guy because I think it's just a really cool case. So he like lived his life for like 26 years. So this was found like back in 2016 or something like that, or maybe 2014. This guy was like 26 years old, somewhere between 26 and 30. He lived his life entirely normally, right? And then like one day he like went to the doctor and he's like, I'm having some headaches, like I don't really know why. So the doctor was like, oh, let's take an MRI, right? And what they found is that like the inside of his brain was basically all fluid. So I'm sure you guys aren't like super familiar with what CT scans are supposed to look like. So I included a picture, but you can see here, right? Like this whole side of his brain, okay? It's all black, which is fluid, okay? This is what it's supposed to look like, all right? So there's like 90% of his cerebral cortex is missing, okay? So it's a very cool case. But if you're sitting there and you're like, how is this guy still alive, right? It's because your brainstem does most of the important stuff for basic functions of living. I'm never going to quiz you on this guy. I just like think it's a cool like segue into the brainstem. So, your brainstem is going to consist of your midbrain, your pons, and your medulla. Okay. Now, the midbrain is going to contain tracts that relay sensory information and motor impulses. The other big thing about it that makes it like distinct from the pons, auditory and visual reflexes. Okay. There's a very specific part of your midbrain that controls these auditory and visual reflexes. Okay. And I'll show you guys what they are when we, on like the next diagram for labeling. Okay. Because I think that helps you remember like the difference between the midbrain and the pons. Okay. Next, you have your pons, which is going to contain tracts and signals to different parts of the brain. Like, you know how like when you're driving into the city and there's like all of the like cross sections, right? The pons is basically like that. There's just a bunch of things going through it. All right. It's not like, I mean, I guess like technically it does have its own functions, but like you guys don't need to know those. Next, you have your medulla oblongata. Okay. I was told in my first semester that there's like this scene in The Waterboy where like Adam Sandler's talking about the medulla oblongata. This is the part of the brain he was talking about. So it has a couple of different really important centers inside of it, starting with your cardiac center. Okay. Your cardiac center is going to be responsible for regulating heart rate. Right. So just like it sounds like cardiac has to do with the heart, cardiac center regulates your heart rate. Vasomotor center. Vasomotor center is going to control blood vessel diameter and affect blood pressure. Okay. Then you also have two respiratory centers, which are going to help regulate breathing. So vaso means vessel, motor, movement. Okay. Respiratory centers regulate breathing. Okay. Now this is the diagram from your book. It has everything on one page if you prefer to see it this way, which is cool. Now, breaking down the labeling, okay? The first part here is going to be your midbrain, okay? Your midbrain is going to sit right underneath your thalamus there, all right? Now, within your midbrain, all right, you have these like, oh, let me use a bigger pen. These like little bubbly things at the back here, okay? These are called your tectum and tegmentum. You guys do not need to know the names for them, okay? These are going to be the things that control your auditory and visual reflexes. What I mean by that, okay? When you hear a like loud sound or you see like a bright light, it's like instinct for you to turn your head towards it, okay? So like if you see something out of your periphery that flashes, chances are you're gonna like turn your head towards it, okay? Same thing with sounds, right? If you hear a loud sound, you'll probably turn your head towards it. Just at first, until you see it's like a bad thing, and then you'll like, okay? So these are going to be responsible for your auditory and visual reflexes. The reason I point that out, because if you're like remembering the anatomy part of it and you're like blanking on which one is the midbrain and which one's the pons, I don't know. Maybe you can like see in your mind which one is doing the auditory and visual reflexes. Okay. The pons, on the other hand, the pons is kind of looks like a pregnant belly, like this. Okay. Like I said, the pons is really just like a crossroads between different expressways in the body. And then you have your medulla. Okay. The medulla oblongata at the bottom here. Okay. The medulla oblongata, it has those three centers, right? It has the cardiac center, the respiratory center, and the vasomotor center. All right. The other thing it does is it connects the brain to the spinal cord. Okay. So these are the different parts of your brainstem. Okay, 10 more seconds. Yeah. Okay. We got like 50-50 between the like hypothalamus and the medulla. But like most people answered medulla, so I'll take that. Okay. So remember, the medulla has those three vital centers, right? You have your heartbeat controlled by what's called your cardiac center. So your heartbeat is going to be controlled by your cardiac center. Okay. Respiration is going to be controlled by your respiratory center. I know I spelled that wrong. I'm sorry. And blood pressure is going to be vasomotor. Okay. Vessel motor motion. Okay. So like you're contracting your blood vessels, which is like altering the blood pressure. All right. So the correct answer to this one is going to be A. The hypothalamus is going to be responsible for controlling the pituitary gland. Okay, so the pituitary gland is really heavily involved in the endocrine system, which I believe you guys cover in Pan Open, but not so much in this class, like class time. The other thing that the hypothalamus does, it has hunger and thirst centers. And I believe temperature, but I'm like doubting myself on that one right now. Can't remember off the top of my head. But I believe temperature as well. Okay. Yeah. So the medulla is going to be found in your brain stem. Okay. That bottommost part. Okay. So your cerebrum, right? Cerebrum's going to be your lobes. Okay. So your lobes, like your frontal lobe, parietal, occipital, temporal, and insula. Right? Your cerebellum we haven't talked about yet. It literally just means little brain. The diencephalon is going to consist of your hypothalamus and your thalamus. Okay. Hypothalamus, thirst and hunger. Thalamus is going to be responsible for like sensory relay. Okay, so it's that like switchboard operator. Okay. Lastly, your brainstem has 3 sections to it, right? Woo. Midbrain, which has tracts, auditory, and visual reflexes. Okay. Why am I blanking? The pons, which is just tracts. That's that pregnant belly. Okay. And lastly, you're gonna have your medulla, right, which has your cardiac, respiratory, and vasomotor centers. Okay. So that's how you can break this question down a little bit more. All right. Next, we're going to talk about the cerebellum. Okay. Cerebellum is literally just means little brain. Now, the cerebellum has more neurons than the rest of the brain combined. Okay. It's very cool. So the cerebellum is about the size of your fist. Now I typed all the information out for you guys because like really like we want you guys to focus like very broadly on the functions and like where you find it, right? Knowing that it's different than the cerebrum, right? Like that it's like its own area. Okay. So the cerebellum, little brain, it's very cool. It has like really cool names for structures inside. So there's like this whole like white matter structure in here called your arbor vitae, which means tree of life. On the back of it, there's like this little squirmy thing, which is called a vermis, which is the Latin word for worm. Has its own hemispheres. It's literally just like a little brain under your brain. So the cerebellum is very cool. Okay. Like 10 more seconds. I have no idea where I stuck my hand. Okay. Yeah, so your limbic system is going to be charged with emotion and learning, right? We have those two structures in there. Okay. You have your hippocampus, which is responsible for learning. And you have your amygdala, which is responsible for emotion. Okay. Now a couple of these areas we didn't really talk about like in a specific sense. So I'm just going to write them down on here. So parietal lobe is going to be responsible for identifying the location of pain. Okay. The muscle movements for both of these, like they're specific areas in the frontal cortex, but they're like broadly part of the frontal cortex, right? So like the way that I like to explain it, like it's like saying Chicago versus Illinois, right? Like those cortex, like the areas are found within that lobe, right? So like Illinois would be the lobe, Chicago would be the cortex, so like the primary association cortex or visual association cortex, whatever it might be. Okay. Excuse me. Sorry. Next, we're going to talk about cranial nerves. Are cranial nerves part of the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system? Let's start there. You got a 50-50 shot.
Gotcha.
Part of your peripheral, right? Because they are not found in your brain. They are not found in your spinal cord. They are just coming out of your brain. So your cranial nerves are technically part of your peripheral nervous system. Okay. Now you have 12 different cranial nerves. Okay. The way that your book explains them, I'm going to just show you really quickly. It's not in order and it's like super detailed. Okay. You guys do not need to know all of this information. So I would focus on knowing like this table. Okay. Don't worry about like identifying the cranial nerves, but this is just to like show you, I guess, what they like look like. Okay. So there's 12 different cranial nerves. There's a whole bunch of different mnemonics to remember them. Okay. But we can just go through each one. So your first one is going to be your olfactory nerve. We've already said that olfaction is the sense of smell. Okay. When I say sensory versus motor, it's just that whether or not the nerve is just dedicated to sensation, or if it's only dedicated to movement. Okay. Some of them say both, because they do both motor and sensation. Now, when we say nerve, it is different than neuron. Okay. A lot of people use the terms interchangeably. They are two different things. A nerve is different than a neuron. A nerve is like a bundle of neurons. Okay, to put it simply. Okay. So your first one is going to be your olfactory nerve. Okay. Type of nerve, it is a sensory nerve. It is solely devoted to smell. So you have your olfactory nerve. It's going to sit right underneath your olfactory area. So pretty cool correlation of like structure and function, right? Next, you have your optic nerve. Okay. Your optic nerve is going to be responsible for the sense of vision. What I mean by that, it is seeing things. Okay. It is bringing that information to the brain. The reason why I'm distinguishing that, the next nerve is also associated with your eye, but it is a motor nerve. It is responsible for moving the eyeball. Okay. So you have 3 different nerves that are involved in moving your eye. They're your ocular motor, your trochlear, and your abducens nerves. So 3, 4, and 6. Okay. The main one that controls motor is going to be the oculomotor. Okay. So ocular motor does most of the eye movement. The trochlear nerve controls one muscle. Okay. Your trochlear nerve is going to be responsible for moving your eye in towards your nose. Okay. And your abducens abducts the eye. So it does like, it's called like a superior rectus muscle. So what it does is it literally like pulls your eyeball like up and out. So like when you roll your eyes. Okay. Now you have your trigeminal nerve. Your trigeminal nerve is going to be responsible for a couple of different things. Mainly face sensation and mastication, meaning chewing. Okay. It does both movement and sensation. Okay. So trigeminal nerve, face sensation, and mastication. Abducens, that's going to be the last one that does eye movement. Oh, I think I just said this, but it like abducts the eye, so it twists it out. Okay. Then you have your facial nerve. Your facial nerve is going to be responsible for facial expression and taste, depending on the area of your tongue. Okay. So your facial nerve, what I mean by depending on the area of the tongue, like the back of your tongue goes to a different nerve than the front of your tongue, basically. Okay. So your facial nerve, facial expression and taste. So that's why we were like telling you guys the different like muscles in your like face, right? Like the zygomaticus, the frontalis, temporalis. Well, the temporalis is the trigeminal, but the different like muscles in your face, right? They're going to tell you if these cranial nerves are damaged, right? So if you have like a hemorrhage or something like that, right? So your facial nerve, facial expression. Vestibulocochlear, okay? Now your vestibulocochlear nerve is responsible for hearing and balance. Your ears, so the vestibulocochlear nerve is coming from your ears, okay? Now when we get to the ears, you're going to learn about the vestibule, which is responsible for balance, and the cochlea, which is going to be responsible for hearing. Okay, so the vestibulocochlear nerve is a sensory nerve, responsible for hearing and balance. Next, you have your glossary. This is also a typo right here. This is supposed to be the number 8. So there's supposed to be like another little line here. Okay. Oh, and I'll go through Roman numerals in a second here. So next you have your glossopharyngeal nerve. Glosso meaning tongue, pharyngeal meaning pharynx. Okay, so glosso comes up twice in this. So it's helpful to know that glosso means tongue. Change the color to white and yeah. Okay, so your glossopharyngeal nerve is going to be responsible for taste as well as your gag reflex. Okay, so your pharynx is like behind your tongue. It's like your throat. Okay, so it's going to be taste and gag reflex. Your vagus nerve is also involved in your gag reflex. It is the main nerve for what's called parasympathetic innervation. Okay, so when we say parasympathetic innervation, the parasympathetic system is a specific subdivision of your peripheral nervous system. It is mainly controlled by your vagus nerve. Okay. Lastly, we have our accessory nerve. Our accessory nerve is a motor nerve. It is responsible for shoulder shrug. Okay. It innervates a very specific muscle. Does anybody remember the muscle that's in your upper back? We just took a test on it on Monday, right? Or if we like included the trapezius on it, but
The trapezius.
oh yeah, I just said it. But I'm sure you guys all knew it, right? So the trapezius, right? The trapezius muscle is going to be responsible for that shoulder shrug. That is very specifically innervated by this accessory nerve. You're also going to see it as like spinal accessory nerve. Okay. But your accessory nerve responsible for shoulder shrugging. Okay. And then the last one is going to be a hypoglossal. Okay. Hypo meaning below, glossal, tongue. Right. It's going to be responsible for swallowing and speech production. It helps move your tongue, basically. Okay. Now, some of the acronyms that I use to memorize this, you can Google and there's like hundreds of them out there. So whatever works for you. The one that works for me, O, to touch and feel very good velvet. So olfactory, optic, ocular, motor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducens, facial, vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, and hypoglossal. Okay. One of the things you can do to help you remember functions is to determine whether it's sensory or motor, right? So acronym that you can use for that. Some say marry money, but my brother says big brains matter most. Okay. So this is the acronym that I will always use. O, to touch and feel very good velvet. If you guys find one that works better for you, you are more than welcome to use that. The reason why I say to learn this acronym, there are 12 cranial nerves. You guys need to know the number as well as the name as well as the function. Okay, like very broadly the function, not like this crazy stuff here. Okay, that is a lot. All right, just like know this and you'll probably be good. You know what I mean? Like you will be good. All right. So let me think. What else? Yeah. So I'll see if I can find like, I don't know, like some video that has like a really good acronym. But the one I always use is O, to touch and feel very good velvet. There is a little like animation from F.A. Davis, which is kind of helpful, so I'll play it. Let's see.
Cranial nerves arise from the brain and brain stem through natural openings in the cranium. These nerves supply the head, neck, and trunk. Some bring information to the brain, such as signals from our organs of smell, vision, and taste. Pair 1, the olfactory nerve. The olfactory nerve controls the sense of smell. Pair 2, the optic nerve. The optic nerve controls vision. Pair 3, the oculomotor nerve. The oculomotor nerve stimulates eyelid movement and pupillary constriction. Pair 4, the trochlear nerve. This nerve directs downward lateral eye movements. Pair 5, the trigeminal nerve. The trigeminal nerve manages chewing, the sensation of touch, and facial pain. Pair 6, the abducens nerve. The abducens nerve directs lateral eye movements. Pair 7, the facial nerve. This nerve manages facial expressions, taste, and salivary and tear duct secretions. Pair 8, the vestibulocochlear nerve, commonly known as the acoustic nerve. The vestibulocochlear nerve controls hearing and balance. Pair 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve. This nerve interprets taste and controls some swallowing movements. Pair 10, the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve stimulates digestive organs and slows heart rate. Pair 11, the spinal accessory nerve. The accessory nerve controls swallowing and muscles used in head movements. Pair 12, the hypoglossal nerve. The hypoglossal nerve directs tongue movements. Use one of the following mnemonics to remember the order of the cranial nerves. Each word in the mnemonic starts with the same letter of each pair of cranial nerves. On old Olympus's towering tops, a Finn and German viewed some hops. Oh, once one takes the anatomy final, a good vacation seems heavenly. On occasion, our trusty truck acts funny. A great vehicle, says Howard.
Okay, so in those acronyms, you'll notice they call the accessory nerve the spinal accessory nerve. It's the same thing. It's just an S versus an A. Okay, so one more MCQ. Okay, 10 more seconds. Yeah, so olfactory nerve, right? Olfactory nerves involved in the sense of olfaction, which is the sense of smell. Okay, so that's all I have for you guys today. So we will leave off there because that's a good stopping point. I know I'm a little behind on emails. So if you emailed me yesterday, actually, I don't think any of you guys did. Yeah. Yeah. So I will be catching up soon, but have a good rest of your weekend, guys. Oh, no, I already talked about exam grades. We're good. Okay.